Welcome to Ritualizing Joy. I hope that you chose the correct breakout room. I know it was a little confusing getting in here. My name is Melissa Gillespie, and I am an elementary school counselor in Los Angeles, up in the Calabasas area, which is North Los Angeles County. And I am so excited to be here today with my amazing colleagues, Lorene and Michelle, who will introduce themselves when they get to their slide. And Nikki, if you want to go ahead and move to the first slide, and we'll explain why Zach Morris was all over our title slide. Now, this actually goes back to the very beginning of our fellowship. So Lorene, Michelle, and I were all partnered together into what is called a SWIP, or a structural witnessing partner. And we were paired by the SCRR staff based on personality and interests and hobbies and backgrounds. And they did an excellent job. They nailed it. And in one of our first meetings together, one of us said something and it wasn't me. And I called for a Zach Morris timeout because I needed to process it. And so since then, our group chat has been named Zach Morris. And we send a lot of Zach Morris back and forth to each other. But ultimately, this really inspired a lot of our work in our time together, in the idea that we really needed to take those moments of pause. And so that's really what called us in the work. Now, when we were talking about what to do for our capstone, we started with this big, huge 20,000-foot dream of we were going to create this amazing, intensive workbook with poetry and quotes and art and songs and links and stories for educators to work on, to really reconnect with their joy, to reconnect with themselves. And then we started to get closer to the deadline and we're like, you know what? We don't really have time for that. What should we do instead? You know what what educators need and counselors need, and like people working in mental health, they need a planner because they all use those. So let's take all those ideas and put them in a planner instead with prompts. And then we have some people who are not planner people. That's not me. But there are some people in my group that are not planner people. And we said, but why are we going to do all of this if somebody's going to start with that intention, but not be able to move through it? And really, they're going to start those first 2 weeks off doing those prompts, and then they're going to get busy, and it's going to be just one more thing that they're not doing. And so really what we did was we took those steps back and really focused on that driving question that Leora talked about, which was, what do we need in our healing? What do we need as people who are on the front lines with kids, who are showing up every day and doing that heart work and really putting ourselves forward? What do we actually need? And what we realized is that what we really needed was permission. And that feeling of working in the fields that we work in, that experience of almost being like considered a martyr, in that at work, you're expected to give 110% to your students, to your staff, to your community. And then when you go home, you're supposed to carry that with you and still be thinking about them and how to support them and reading books to support them and watching things that will help them understand things, and really understanding that we feel guilty a lot of the time when we take time for ourselves, and when we reflect on our own needs. And so ultimately, what we came to is our capstone was really building intention for joy and building that permission for ourselves that it's okay to make the time, even if it's only 5 minutes a day, to do something on purpose because it brings you joy and it sparks you back up again. And what that looked like for each of us was very different, but we also really honed in on the fact that the accountability piece for each other, not in the you must do this, but in the community building of that intentionality and that ritual that we were building into our days, was really powerful, especially for all of us who in this space, I can almost guarantee you haven't had the easiest last year, my friends. There's been something that's been heavy or hard or weighing on your heart, and knowing that you can find people and we can find people that remind us that joy is allowed and that you are okay to step into yourself, was something that we really focused on. And I'm going to pass it off to the wonderful Michelle on the next slide.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And we're going to go to the next slide. So welcome everybody. And I'm rocking my Kelly Kapowski side ponytail on a double dare, but also because it brought me so much joy. Um, but I want to jump off first, introduce myself. I am Michelle Holmes. I am a diversity director at a small school in Santa Barbara, and I've been an educator for 21 years. And the in this process, we got our swoops, and I panicked. I was like, they're going to put me in a room with two people, and I'm going to have to connect and build this connection virtually. And I don't know how this is going to happen. And it worked, right? It wasn't magic. It was three people who had similar goals, similar ideas moving forward about what it means to care for each other, what it means to take care of our students, what it means to take care of our colleagues. And Melissa talked about there's something each of us went through during the course of this project. I think at some point in time, each one of the three of us, I'm going to bring it back to our team, went through something completely life-changing and maybe not in the best ways. And also it brought it brought out some of the best parts of us. And we were able to remind each other, hey, in this moment, what do you need to be supported? Which led us to this idea of how do we take care of each other? And as we were going through all the reflection and the pivoting, and we think about, yeah, we need these rituals, we need these ways of reminding ourselves. That so what question comes up. And we start talking about self-care. And one of the questions that we got asked both by each other and by the SCRR staff was, okay, that's so great that you want to help everybody else, but what's it look like for you? What does it mean for you? So often, as educators and people in the support positions, we start to think about how we take care of other people. And that self-care becomes self-care as a way to take care of everybody else and not ourselves. And what you're looking at is called the supported self-care model. And I promise you, I did not know that Lior was going to use that definition. And the first four words of that definition were going to be how individual, institutional, organizational, and systemic structures support. But it works. We planned it that way. We're going to go with that. This model that you're looking at was created by some researchers who were thinking about what did it mean to actually have self-care? I think sometimes humans tend to walk into self-care and think self-care is for Sundays and I can self-care my way out of situations. And the reality is we live in a collective. Self-care requires the institutional to take part, the organization that you're in to take part, and you to take part. And if we are just thinking that we're going to take care of ourselves and somehow the system will fix itself, it won't. And by looking for our joy, by taking care of ourselves every single day, we are able to show up in a different way for others. So instead of saying, I'm taking care of myself so that I can go take care of someone else, we're saying, how do we find that joy so that someone else, when we show up, we are our whole self and we can give them space instead of dipping into the space that we may not have. So we want to acknowledge that our joy comes without any restraints and any regrets. I am not giving up my joy. I am not giving up my care because by doing so, I create space, right? And that's how we become leaders. That is how we become stronger communities that take care of one another. And the last thing I'll say before I pass it off to Lorene is that yeah, someone mentioned to me, Melissa mentioned, it just takes 5 minutes. So many of us on the screen take vitamins. We do certain things for ourselves every single day. And joy has to become that vitamin, whether it's a minute, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 10 minutes. But there's got to be something that we do that restores ourselves because we have to be whole in order to support someone else. And with that, I'm going to pass it to our lovely partner, Lorene.
Thank you, Michelle. So my name is Lorene Diaz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Culture and Resources at Oregon Wellbeing Trust. And the other night I saw a post I wish I would have written down who said it, but they said, I used to think joy was something I'd feel later, after the goals, after the growth. But it turns out joy was the sun on my face this morning, and I almost missed it. Last year, I attended this session and I watched the fellowship presentations, and Canada Taylor Parker explored what's healing us, like taking a minute to really pay attention to the things that feel like healing. So, as Michelle, Melissa, and I kind of honed in on what we needed and what felt like healing to us, it had little to do with that end product. Like, as beautiful as that planner was going to be and still is in our mind, it couldn't match the meaning that came from the community we found with one another. And that wasn't something we planned for. But through our conversations, like these started, it started to be like an exploration of self-reflection practices, and it kind of meandered its way into conversations about joy. And then Antoine Moore with SCRR, we had a session with him, and he brought in this element of ritual as a means to accessing joy, and we've been in conversation about that ever since. Our rituals started to emerge, and they have been very different for one another. And I think, the important conversation we had is that it wasn't about toxic positivity. We weren't talking about sunshine and rainbows all the time. We had to get really honest with ourselves about the impact of what we were experiencing and be real about needing support. And I think the three of us are people who are very comfortable offering support all the time. And it became a true practice to reach out to one another and say, I need support. This is what's happening for me right now. And I think, it's one thing to know those things intellectually. It's a whole other story to like really, truly put that into practice. And the beauty of this time together is that we just like loved and affirmed each other along the way and created a space where we could dig really deep. So now what? Questions that you might consider exploring like on your own or in your community. These are some questions we looked at together. Is what gets in the way of experiencing joy? There's a lot that gets in the way. There's so much that we can't control. And so what do you need? Melissa has to ask me this more than once because my first answer is rarely what I need and usually all about what everyone else needs. And so then Melissa will kindly remind me, like, but what do you need? So I invite you to ask that question as many times as you need to get to your truth. What permission do you need in order to access joy more often? There's so much suffering in the world, and we can experience a lot of guilt for seeking things that light us up. I think I've had some solid practices when I've needed to settle my nervous system, like when everything feels overwhelming and I need to just like be able to rest. And while that's important and it's a part of this practice for me, I feel like that conversation stops at survival. And what was different about this conversation is that we explored like wanting and deserving so much more. So you deserve more than exhaustion and overwhelm. You deserve more than surviving capitalism. You deserve to access what lights you up and moves you from the inside. You deserve to let your community support you too. And not because it makes you better at your job, that's a great perk, but because you deserve dignity, more presence within your days, and more life-giving moments within your weeks. So I think, I entered this conversation thinking that if we change our systems, then we'll find our way to joy more often. But I think joy is here for us now and can accompany us on the path of healing. And we can embrace both the duality of holding all that is painful and all that is beautiful. And until we find joy within ourselves, we won't find it within our systems. When we honor our own humanity, we learn to create workplaces infused with care, and you're worthy of its medicine. So don't miss it. We've created a handout. I think it's going to be shared in the chat. Thank you, Nikki. And there's a few pages here. It's very short. We kept it brief. You'll find a permission slip that you can put somewhere and reference often that gives you permission and reminds you that you have permission to seek joy. There's tips for educators to spark joy based on the amount of time you might have, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe an hour. There's guidance around creating a ritual practice, a joyful intention organizer to help you make space for more of what you want. And then there's two versions of bingo cards. This is a really cool practice Melissa has going, where she fills out the card with experiences she wants to have over the course of a year and checks them off as they happen. And it's like a creative, nice, light way of holding yourself accountable. So check it out, keep what's helpful, maybe share where it might be helpful, and I'll pass it to Michelle to close us with a poem. Next slide, please.
Don't Hesitate was a poem that got shared with us that some of us had seen before, but it felt like the catalyst for what we were doing. Because as we were pivoting, there was this, oh, don't forget about the crumbs. So I'm going to read it for all of you, and I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and think about what you're listening to and what you've just looked at our handouts, and what it is that you need to find that joy. We want to give you permission right now to feel that joy wherever it lies in your body, wherever it lies in the space around you, because we are all worthy of joy. It is an innate part of us, and we have to be able to feel that as much as we allow ourselves to feel the overwhelm and the anger and the fear and the frustration. Joy should be just as easy to tap into. So close your eyes if you like. You can definitely keep them open. This is Don't Hesitate by Mary Oliver. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give into it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, and that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you'll notice it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb. Thank you all for being here with us.